Good afternoon. We're so thankful that you are able to join us today as we talk about death care roles with Lee Webster and Francesca Arnoldy of our End-of-Life Doula program at the University of Vermont. We're so thankful that you are here to join us. I want to welcome everybody joining us on YouTube and people in our Adobe Connect webinar platform. We're so thankful you're here. We can't wait to see the questions that you have for both Lee and Francesca. A couple housekeeping things that I want to go over. There is an opportunity to ask questions. Lee and Francesca are going to have a very wonderful conversation and discussion. You can put your questions into the chat box. I'm going to be monitoring those, and we'll ask Francesca and Lee after they've gone through kind of most of part of the discussion in the middle of the presentation. So there will be plenty of time for questions more towards the end. In addition, I just wanted to also share that so many people have wanted to know more about the End-of-Life Doula program at University of Vermont. So at the very end of the presentation, if you're interested in some of the logistics of the program, we just have a few minutes at the very end that will share some of the information about UVM's program. So if you are curious about that, please stick around right to the very end and we'll share that at the end. And this is being recorded. We will share the recording out with everyone who has RSVP'd today as well. So we'll do quick introductions. We'll go over what is an end-of-life doula. Many people have been wanting to know this over the last month, thanks to some incredible coverage that the program and this amazing work has received in the New York Times. And then Francesca and Lee are going to have a really great discussion about death care roles. And then, as I mentioned, we'll briefly go over what is UVM's end-of-life doula program and also the companion animal program, a new program that we brought online in the last year. So we'll just touch base on that briefly. My name is Nicola Willie-Fenton. I'm the Content Marketing Manager at UVM's Continuing and Distance Education, and we're so fortunate to have Francesca leading us in our discussion and leading our End-of-Life Doula program and our Companion Animal program. Francesca, as always, thank you so much for being with us today. And we're super excited that Lee is with us. This is the first time we've had Lee in one of our discussions for End-of-Life Doula, and she is also one of the leaders in this field and an expert, and her perspective today will be incredibly rich for everyone who's looking to learn. Lee, thank you so much for being with us today as well. So I just wanted to ground us in what are we talking about today? What is end-of-life care and end-of-life doula? Francesca, can you start us off? And I know Lee has perspective, but just help us understand what is this work that we're doing today?
Well, when we talk about defining an end-of-life doula, we can consider a number of different pathways and facets. So there's the private practice doula, and then there are providers who provide end-of-life care who wish to integrate end-of-life doula skills and approaches into the work they're already doing. We cater to both in the program, and we really try to aim for making this accessible and informative to all humans, because we feel like this is human work, companioning people through the end of their life and through their grieving process. So an end-of-life doula is a non-medical emotional support person who assists with the planning, preparing, and processing that is generally a part of the journey once someone has received a terminal diagnosis through their end-of-life journey, which our focus is always living well and living meaningfully according to that person right up till the time that they die. So that's a quick definition, and here are some of the other points that we cover in the course and that we include in our role and scope. So Lee, did you have anything you wanted to add to that definition of a doula?
Not really. I think that really encapsulates my vision of what this is. I would say that because I come from about 38 years of hospice work, I initially saw this as hospice on steroids, and I'm glad that things have gotten really well defined at this point, because I think it really helps both the doulas who are doing the work and the families that they're serving, that the parameters here are very, very clear now. So you did a great job. Thanks.
Thanks to both of you. And so now I'm really going to toss it over to the two of you, because we want to learn from you more about the death care roles. And we've got a few areas in particular that I know you're going to walk us through. So Francesca, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Again, Lee, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to follow your work during my time here as a doula and to learn from you every year that I've been involved in this. And I know that we've been connected from the start of this program, which has been wonderful. So looking at your vast experience in the death care field, what are you really passionate about right now?
Boy, this is a tough question. It all interests me. It's all part of this care continuum and that's part of the reason that I've stayed in the work for so long and had dipped my toe in so many different parts of it because I see the connections between all of them. But I think particularly right now what I'm focusing on is a lot of advocacy work around the downsides of cremation and the upsides of conservation burial. So that needs a lot of amplifying out there in the world. One of the biggest things that I really am concerned about and have been from the beginning is social and environmental justice. So around the end of life and around funerals in particular, and finding ways to increase financial and physical access for people. So that's sort of an underlying theme, and I think it's kind of popping to the top. It's getting in this new climate that we're in, it's starting to get more attention around that. And as far as doula work is concerned, I'm still really interested in preserving the boundaries around practice for doulas. As I was working originally to set up the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance with Mary Lynn Rush and Deanna Derby and Cochran, and all these other people that I was working with, we were very concerned about creating those boundaries, again, for people to be able to understand what they're walking into and, setting up standards and now making sure that those standards are followed and people feel comfortable with them. But my end goal is right back there with the social justice issues around that, and that's about protecting doulas as they move toward professionalization and also to protect the rights of families. That's really at the core of all the work that I do.
That's wonderful. And I think part of that work is making sure that people understand their options because we don't know what we don't know. And so we get a lot of doulas who wonder about home funerals, and we cover the topic in the course, but I'm hoping that you might be able to explain a little more, an overview of home funerals, the practicalities, the preparation involved.
Yeah, I think this is a great question too, because as a doula, I think we're looking at focusing on the end of life, the dying process, and part of that is the preparation, and part of that preparation, of course, is what was going to happen after the death occurs. But there's some real issues around that, as we'll talk about them more. But I think the thing for doulas to understand and be able to convey to their families is that home funerals are just not all that complicated. They're really about educating the family about what to do and what to expect. They're about educating the family about how to do things like care of the body and about the logistics, some of the things you want to prepare for, the logistics of moving the body and transporting the body and who's going to complete the paperwork, who has the right to do that. And, all of those types of things, doulas can be really helpful in prepping the family for all of that, mostly the expectation part, but also some of the, the real issues, like can we get up and down the stairs? Can we find all of the information that the family is going to need to put on the death certificate and have that prepped and ready? Prepping the family for what to do and what not to do at the time of death. Putting together a plan for who to call afterwards. All that fits into doula space. There are other things that a doula can really do to help prepare the family, and that has to do with making sure that if hospice is involved, that hospice, all the personnel, including the doctor, know what's going to happen because you need them later for signing paperwork. You also want to prepare clergy, if clergy is involved. Let them know that this is going to be occurring at home, how that can happen. If the family plans to do all of the work themselves, including filing the paperwork, particularly at a town clerk or a county clerk's office, that type of thing for themselves, they need to be sure that those town and county clerks know how to handle it when somebody walks in the door. So you have to do some public educating around it and advocating for your clients right away, for your families right away. So, different pieces like that, making sure that the family has made the right phone calls to the right people and the right, like the cemetery. You don't just, if you're not using a funeral director, you want to be sure that you know how to get things set up so that you have a smooth transition all the way through.
We often see doulas as bridging people to the services and resources that they need. And I think about the specialized role of a home funeral guide. And while there is some overlap, would you be able to define for us what a home funeral guide offers?
Yeah, and it's quite specifically different. So that's an important thing for doulas to understand, and we can get into the legal part of that in a minute. But basically, home funeral guides are people who are really educators. All right, they're not hands-on providers. That's very important because of the legal ramifications of practicing without a license. Because the minute that person dies that you've been caring for, they now live in a licensed, regulated, industry space. So we can talk about that in more depth. But basically what home funeral guides do is that they start at the death. They might have prepared with the family a little bit earlier. They might have been called by the family. If they weren't already there in a doula role, they might be called separately. And that person is then going to be sharing the laws with the family. They need to know what the laws are, both state and local laws. They need to know community officials and what the processes are for doing things so that they can advise the family about those things. They can even, as educators, they can even demonstrate body care. They can't do it hands-on for a fee, but you can do this, by educating. You can also participate as a home funeral guide if the family invites you in to do it. But it is the family's sole responsibility to take care of things after a death occurs. So all of this, as you can see, is really about, setting things up. It can help with transporting as long as a member of the family is involved there. They can facilitate getting the paperwork signed, but again, the family is responsible for that. It basically can't do anything that a funeral director would do. And in some states, like Vermont, actually, planning a funeral falls under the purview of a licensed professional. So even home funeral guides are not going to do anything that resembles planning a funeral with the family. You can feel that it's getting a little more close and a little more tricky. So that's why we want to make that distinction between what doulas do and what home funeral guides do. But for the most part, work that I've done with families, it almost always starts with a phone call. And for me, for a very long time, it's almost always completed its life with the family online or on the phone. What people are really looking for from home funeral guides is the reassurance that they're doing this right, that they're not going to get in any trouble, and that they're going to be able to take as much time as they need to with their family. And that's what home funeral guides do. We support people. We give them the confidence to do this themselves. So guides, by the way, get prepared in different ways. There are specialized trainings for home funeral guides. They've been around for, 25 years now. The guides are expected to do a lot of research, gather a lot of resources, and basically make all those professional connections. And all that's pretty similar to what doulas do too. So you can see why there's a lot of overlap.
It seems like it's rooted in education and empowerment, really encouraging families to consider taking care of their own. Could you share with us any stories of supporting families through that process?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I always hesitate to tell other people's stories. So I can tell you my own story. I had my mom with me. She was dealing with dementia for a very long time. She was in a care facility and ended up bounced all over the place. And finally, after huge struggles, I got to bring her home, which was an enormous privilege. And she was home with me for about 3 weeks. And when she died, I was right with her. The whole process, getting to do it myself rather than just advising other people, it changed my perspective on how it works. There is a lot of stress and tension around, will the person die at a time when I'm going to be able to legally get in and get the paperwork done? Because different states have different time periods for getting things done. And I was able to do this. My mom died the Sunday before Thanksgiving. So I was able to get into the town clerk's office, get the paperwork taken care of. My hospice was lovely. Of course, I've been working with my hospice for 20 years, so it was great to have an in on the inside. So I got all my paperwork taken care of. But, I spent a lot of my time running back and forth, getting paperwork, getting it to the town clerk, crossing my fingers that she'd been listening to me all these years and was prepared to file it. She hadn't ever filed a death certificate from an individual family before. And it worked just fine, smooth like butter. And we got through all of that, and my mom wanted to be cremated, so my sister and I drove her to the crematory, and then went and picked her up the day after that, which was Wednesday. We then proceeded to bury her with my dad, also cremated in a companion urn. On Wednesday and on Thursday, sat down with the whole family to have a wonderful celebration. The smoothness of it from everyone else's perspective was what was really remarkable. They didn't really see any of my anxiety about getting everything filed properly, and they wouldn't. It worked well. So my real takeaway from the experience is that, as I said before, it's just not as complicated as you think it's going to be. It's actually less complicated. You have fewer people in the mix who have to make decisions, and you simply do the next thing on the list. And it made for a tremendous amount of time to be able to go and sit with my mom and have family members who are very uncomfortable around dead people take that little trip into the room and go, oh, this isn't so scary after all. I mean, there was a total shift with all my siblings now about what I do. For one thing, I'm not quite as kooky as they thought. And the second part is that they feel that this really is the right thing for them. So, and I do see this when I hear from other families. I hear all I needed was a little extra time, and they got it.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. What a lovely way to honor your mom and your relationship with her and this important work that you're doing. Do you want to share with us about natural green burials and how that movement has built some momentum?
Yeah, sure. That is one story that I love to tell, by the way. A lot of people wonder, first of all, a lot of people don't know that cemeteries tend to require cement vaults to go around caskets and that type of thing. So when I tell them that, they scratch their heads and say, how in the world did we get to that point? And the way we got to that was that an entrepreneur named Wilbert Haas in the 1930s went to Egypt to see Tutankhamun's tomb, and he had this great idea. His family owned a concrete business. They were all concrete magnates, and he decided, well, vaults, that would be the way to take care of things. And at that time, of course, everybody was worried about ghouls. Grandma would turn into a ghoul and come back and haunt you. They were worried about people getting into the graves, or animals, rodents getting into the graves. So this was the perfect solution to a problem that didn't exist, right? None of this has any basis in reality. So what we're doing now is trying to get over this little hiccup in the history of burying people from the beginning of time, and get rid of those unnecessary things that are really quite damaging environmentally. And what happened here in the U.S. is in about 1997, Kimberly and Billy Campbell started the first green burial cemetery in the U.S., which is also a conservation cemetery, meaning that they're protecting land on which they bury bodies. And it's now years and years later, we have over 340 green burial cemeteries in the U.S. and Canada. I keep track of them too. And many, many more coming online very soon, because people have recognized that there's no need to be putting all of these, things. Concrete is highly damaging. It has a huge carbon footprint. All of those steel caskets, and nothing's ever going to biodegrade. So basically what we're just asking people to do is to consider being buried in some kind of a biodegradable container, a shroud, something woven, cardboard even, or a nice plain pine box, in a cemetery that is just going to, take care of the land that you're buried in. Everything else still applies. You're still protected in perpetuity, all that kind of thing. But I think what doulas might be most interested in is in educating their families about this, because if you're going to go through a doula, a doula supported dying event, you're probably going to then want to be looking at something that is more natural. The home funeral is natural, and the next piece is to go to and have an uneventful, sort of homegrown service at graveside, with family members who can participate and shovel dirt back in, be there to lower the body, have ceremonies with clergy or on their own, hire funeral directors to help or not. The options are huge and varied, but all of it, as you can see, brings control back to the family. So green burial is just another piece of that whole vision of empowerment, as you were saying.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing about that. It's so important that we as doulas and as death care providers, wearing any hat and any title that we choose, are aware of options locally and are part of this movement to ensure that people have as many options as they need to make personally meaningful choices. And we hear a lot about how people at the end of life want to make decisions that are in alignment with the choices they've made as they have lived. And for a lot of people, this is one of them. So thank you. Nicole, what are our
Absolutely.
questions looking like in the chat?
Very active, so we can certainly jump to a few questions. I think that would be wonderful if we could do that now. One question that's come up a couple times, which I think is a really great one, and I just am zipping through to find the specific question. This goes back to a little bit of the discussion that you were having with the home funerals. And I just want to find the exact wording, so bear with me one second. There we are. Thank you. From Sheila. Are end-of-life doulas only part of home funerals? In other words, can they be involved in other traditional funerals and end-of-life rituals? So, out of the context of the home funeral, what is the role for end-of-life doulas in the more, traditional setting for end-of-life funerals and recognition?
Do you want me to take that one?
Doulas are definitely.
I think, Francesca,
Sure, go ahead, Lee.
You probably have more practical information about that. But absolutely. The whole idea, as you said, is for families to make their own decisions around this. And even in the home funeral world, we're not talking about families doing everything. Most families do this. We call them blended funerals, where we have funeral directors who are providing whatever services the family wishes to have. And the family just gets the opportunity to do a few other things they might choose to. A home funeral, to define that really means that the family does what they choose. And they might choose not to hire someone to do parts for them, but they might also. So, and as far as a doula is concerned, I think that it's still up to the family to make all of those arrangements if they're using a funeral director. They make all of those choices. Now, a doula can provide some resources, because we have created those resources in the home funeral community to learn what different funeral directors charge, for instance. It might be helpful as a doula to be able to explain to families that funeral director A down the street is going to charge you $3,000 more than funeral director B down the other street. We have those figures. We have that information. So that's the way that a doula can be helpful. Not being judgmental about it, not being, directive about it, simply being able to say, if this is the direction you want to go, I can get you extra information. That's the way I look at what I do as a doula.
Francesca, did you want to add anything else to that?
Sure. Just to piggyback that, in the course, we ask our learners to develop a directory list, and the list is associated with the topics of each week. And so as part of that list, we're looking at what is available in your local community, in your area that you're going to serve people. within, and we collect that information like Lee is talking about as well. So what are your options for, are there home funeral guides available? Are there cemeteries that exclusively offer green burial, or that have sections of the cemetery that maybe that's an option, and all the cemetery options, places of worship, and then funeral directors, funeral homes. So we have compiled all of that to be able to share with our clients so that we can really meet their needs and also potentially broaden their horizons, because a lot of the time people are just going along with, well, I thought this was it. I mean, this is all I've seen, this is all I've known. And we're able to say, well, here is the array of options that we can explore together.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the point you were making about empowerment, just really arming the family with more information and more options than maybe that they had realized was out there for them. This question comes up quite a bit, and I've seen it a little bit in our chat today. The role of end-of-life doula and hospice, are they complementary? Is there ever conflict? How do you navigate those waters as an end-of-life doula, with many people volunteering in hospice and or trying to get in, and hospice might be a natural way to explore some end-of-life doula work?
Yeah, I would say yeah, I mean, I have one thing I want to plug before you talk about it. There is a major piece on the NEDA website about hospice and the connection between us that I wrote while working with the National Hospice and Palliative Organization, the Doula Council, that we also started. And I'd recommend that people take a look at that, because it really does help understand the connection between the two. But that's 20 pages long. So Francesca, you might want to shorten that up and explain it.
I mean, it is a layered answer, because as Nicole mentioned, some doulas choose to volunteer with a hospice organization, and it's a beautiful way to gain experience. And for some people, that's their end goal. They don't anticipate hanging a shingle and becoming an entrepreneur and launching a business. And we completely support that. And there are many hospice orgs that are also recognizing this subset, this doula role within hospice. So we have people locally here who have trained to be doulas in our program or elsewhere, and who then complete the hospice volunteer training. And our hospice is able to recognize that there are specific strengths and additional services that doulas are really well prepared for and are very interested in offering. So they honor that here, and in more and more hospices we're seeing that, which is lovely. On very rare occasion, I have heard of a few doulas who have convinced a hospice organization to hire them in the doula role as a paid position on the hospice team. It's very rare. They are our doula unicorns. And for some doulas, they're not even interested in that, because they want to remain outside of the medical model. So within our role and scope, there's a lot there for us. And so for the people who are thinking about becoming private practice doulas, you really have to be committed and dedicated to being an entrepreneur on top of being a doula. And that works well for some people. And some people have launched very successful businesses, either in private practice or in partnerships or within collectives or collaboratives, which is a beautiful model for death care providers. And it is possible. Yet along with that, you have to be prepared to do a lot of community education, because people don't know what this role is. More and more people are knowing what a birth doula is, and so that helps give us a bit of, a foundation to work with there. But we have to be able to explain what it is we're offering and how that complements what's already available. So in terms of hospice or palliative care, in our course, we go into a lot of detail about those different services, what's included, the different team members, so that a doula won't duplicate what's already available. We work harmoniously with people and identify, are there any additional levels of support that are needed and could be beneficial here? And that's what we step into in our emotional support role.
Great. Thank you so much for, you just answered probably 6 questions in that one response too, Francesca, because we also have seen a lot of questions come through clarifying that role. There was a question that came through, said, are doulas more information gatherers and providers? I thought they were more on a spiritual role for families. So how do you help our viewers to understand the variety of roles that a doula plays? Because I think that's what I've learned the most from you is doulas are companions, and they're there to listen and support what is needed, and that may look like so many different things throughout the process.
Yeah, so I've been focusing a little more on the logistical and the oversight of the experience, which is what some people are more drawn to in the death care field, and that's totally fine, and there's a need for it. So someone who can come in and think about the schedule, think about the appointments, and organize that. When should we have visitors come in? When do you have the most energy? Who would you like to see and for how long? And how do you want those visits to go? We can also think about the atmosphere around that person. And so when we welcome people to come visit, can we help prepare them for what they're going to be stepping into and for your own wishes about what you want this space to look like and feel like and smell like and sound like? We can do all of that, and we can identify the strengths and gifts within a client's natural network, assuming that this person might have one, because not everybody does. And we also work with people who are anticipating walking this journey fairly alone beyond their medical care team. And we can say, here's an idea for you, and we can plant seeds, and we can invite people to participate in the experience at their comfort level, which is really important because we don't want to overstep or take over. We're not there to control and to direct. We're there to honor and support. And so then there is also the beautiful bedside presence that many of us are drawn to. So that listening ear, that compassionate support, the believing in someone, the being able to listen to the tough stuff, whether it's regrets that people are carrying with them or worries and anxieties, because some of our clients aren't able to share that with their loved ones. They feel like they have to be stoic or strong for other people. And sometimes it's their loved ones that feel like they can't have those honest conversations with our client. So we can become that listening ear. And then perhaps once they have surfaced some of this, they might feel even more comfortable to be able to have those conversations together, and we could help facilitate some of those as well. We also help prepare for their time of vigil. So the time that they're actively dying, and generally people aren't able to communicate verbally any longer. And we can look at what's your ideal location? Who is your ideal team of visitors and supporters and caregivers that you want surrounding you? What makes you feel most safe and comfortable? And how can we get creative? What contingency plans can we have in place? Because sometimes we face an unexpected twist or turn. So that's something else that doulas can support. And then life reviews, which can be informal or formal. So sometimes it's listening to someone reminisce about their life, and sometimes it's creating an actual keepsake from those memories and messages that they want to pass on to certain people. So there's definitely a huge variety, and doulas don't need to take it all on. I always encourage people to kind of start small and notice where you're feeling pulled toward initially, and then build from there.
Great. Thank you so much. And I hopefully that helps to answer the questions that many of our viewers are having about the complexity and all-encompassingness of the end-of-life care work. I have a question as well from Lawrence on YouTube, and was thinking maybe Lee might be able to answer this one. The question is, do doulas get involved in death choice conversations with clients prior to a terminal death diagnosis? Many elderly folks have not had an open conversation about death and the choices that they have. A little bit what Francesca was talking about, but Lee, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. And in my experience as a hospice volunteer and then as a doula, I find that often families are have sort of a built-in system about what they can and can't talk about, and they don't tend to get very creative within that dynamic. So having an outsider who is wise enough to know what their boundaries are, and also comes prepared with sort of trigger questions that they can prompt a conversation very, very gently, or simply wait. I mean, I've had many people who have I've come in to check thinking that they were fine, and for once other family members weren't there, and you'll find that person looking at you saying, "I'm dying," right? And you're the only person in the room. And at that point, you have an opportunity, and clearly they didn't want to share this with their family. It's too painful, but it's not quite as painful to do it with someone who they respect, and who is outside, but still connected. So those conversations can happen, and they can happen really quickly. You need to be prepared for them, and you need to know how to respond to them, to be helpful to the person who is asking the question. So yeah, I would say that this is something that happens fairly frequently. But if you're a doula and you don't ever get asked this question, don't be disappointed, because it's not your prime directive. But you do need to be prepared for it.
Great, thank
Francesca,
you.
have you got experience with this too? Have you had experience with people doing this?
In that, information hasn't been shared readily, but certainly with trying to meet people where they are in terms of their level of acceptance. And what I see is that it waxes and wanes. People have moments that they want to face it and they want to go there and they want to have a frank conversation, or they want to make some concrete plans. And then they have other times that they completely back away from it and they're not interested and they're not available emotionally for that, and they want to keep it light. And that's totally fine. And we ride those waves with people.
Here's an interesting question, and Francesca, we usually get this in our info sessions about the program, is the kinds of roles that people may be in, and do those translate well into this work? And we have a question from Jane, and Jane says, I'm a licensed psychologist with a specialty in grief and most interested in the program, how it would augment my practice. How do we make known the availability of our services? So kind of two questions there. So, and this happens a lot, the roles that people may be coming from and how this supports them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Definitely. I mean, we have a lot of people from the mental health field come through the training program, as well as the spiritual care field and nurses. So we just wrapped a course last night, and I've been reading their beautiful goodbye posts. And so I hear this a lot about how people are planning to integrate some of what they have learned and their takeaways. And what we offer is this space that's very welcoming and warm and safe. We do a lot of community building, a lot of developing rapport, and a lot of practicing what it is to respond in the doula way that's rooted in compassion. And when we suspend judgment, and we create space for people to explore intense issues. And so what we find is that part of the process comes from introspection. It comes from revisiting old wounds and the grief that we carry ourselves, and that important work in preparation for being able to support other people through that journey. That's very healing, and that informs their work moving forward. And then we hear about the more concrete skills that we offer and that we cover. So things like just thinking about these goodbye posts in particular, thinking about shadow work and what does that mean in your mental health field role or spiritual care. What does that mean to work with our shadow sides? That's really important to honor that and acknowledge it and figure out, how do you deal with that when it comes up, when you feel triggered. And then things like unconditional positive regard, which is a guiding light for me and has been since I was an undergrad 20 years ago at UVM. It's something that really stuck with me, and I utilize it in my relationships, in personal relationships, in work relationships, and as a doula, definitely. So how do you hold trust in someone's own inner wisdom and their strength and ability to be able to navigate their best path, knowing that what they choose for themselves might be different from what I choose for myself, and their perception of suffering might look different than my perception of suffering. So all of these, I feel like, are what I hear from our graduates and our learners is that they're useful and beneficial human skills, personally and professionally, kind of no matter what the title is that they hold.
I think we hear that all the time, that I bring this work into my personal life, whether it's bringing it into their professional as well. There's so much that folks learn from this course that pertains to everyday life. And that being said, we do get this question quite a bit, and I'd love to hear maybe from Lee's perspective too, in seeing this industry grow, the opportunity to do this work. And so many people ask, well, how do I start a doula practice? What advice or what guidance do you give folks that might ask that question, Lee?
Well, I try to steer them toward really comprehensive training programs first, so that they can dip their toe. I also suggest that they do volunteer work with a local hospice if they haven't before, because a lot of us, there's been an awful lot of increased interest in the whole death world and everything with it, more death acceptance. But when it comes down to the actual being in the room and dealing with all the different people and players, there is a certain capacity that you have to have. And one of the things you need to learn about yourself before you can practice any of this is to find out whether you're a fixer or you're a listener, or you're what kind of, what's the role that you're actually going to play when you're in the situation. And you have to be totally truthful with yourself about it. So I think that anybody looking to do this, there are practical things you have to know. And you need to learn those through a bona fide training. The UVM training program is right at the top of my list. There are a few others. You'll find many on the NIDA directories. But I think more than that, you need to look at this less as I'm going to go learn a new profession. I'm going to learn all of the logistics and the practicalities here. It's what Francesca was really talking about, is that this is a self-exploration that has to occur before you can begin to think about lending a hand to others. We are not fixers. We can bring a lot of things that will help fix, but we are not the fixers. So if I could give anybody any advice, I would say, get ready for the introspective ride of your life.
Thank you for that perspective as well. Such important information. And I don't know that I've heard it posed that way. So really, really valuable. Thank you so much, Lee. Francesca, we're getting a lot of questions about the course, and so, which is so wonderful. And we've had so much interest in our End-of-Life Doula and our End-of-Life Companion Animal Care courses in the last month, which is one of the most wonderful things ever. That Francesca has a goal of a doula in every community, doulas all across the United States, all across the world. So we're slowly chipping away at that goal, Francesca, through our program. And so I just wanted to recognize that people are asking in the chat as well, tell us a little bit about the program. So I just want to pause for a moment. We'll come back to a few questions to answer here at the end. But Francesca, just give us a quick overview. You certainly don't have to read all the points, but what is UVM's End-of-Life Doula program? And I also have a slide on the companion animal that we can talk about in just a second.
Okay, great. So our program is 8 weeks online, and we've been online since the beginning, so we didn't have to pivot during the pandemic, and we've continued to see strong demand. And as Nicole mentioned, we get people from all across the globe, which is amazing because it really enriches the learning experience for all of us, myself included. I'm constantly learning based off of the stories that are shared and what are the cultural practices in your home area and what are the available services. We had somebody who took the course and a Turkish person. We had somebody else, I don't know if it was that learner specifically, who had mentioned, I didn't know what advanced care planning is. I didn't know what advanced directives are. We don't use those here. We don't use those terms. We don't have legal forms. And so it's really incredible to get a glimpse into what's happening elsewhere, and then to build community around that and learn from one another. So throughout the 8 weeks, we have 8 required modules. And the work is asynchronous in the sense that we don't have live sessions, yet we move through the content together. So we have deadlines on usually Sunday nights and Tuesday nights, with modules opening every Wednesday morning. And the discussion boards are really interactive. We do a lot of practicing, the doula way, the doula voice, when we're responding to other people's posts right from the beginning. So we give lots of clear directions and encouragement on how to do that. And then we're going and doing our own work. Like Lee and I have been talking about that, introspective work. So writing the letters to our loved ones, saying our goodbyes. I just was reading through our obituary thread. We ask people to use this really interesting, unique way of creating their own obituary and then reflecting on what is that like to really sit with that, to really let that realization settle into your mind and into your heart and into your body. What does that bring up for you? So it's an amazing process. We also do a longer spanning project in the middle of the program that we call our Life Story Project, where we ask learners to find a volunteer and conduct a life review session of sorts. And then it's recorded or it's transcribed. It could be video, audio, it could be written out. And then you offer that back to your volunteer, have them make any edits if that's applicable or necessary, and then get their feedback. And then we talk about it together as a group. And we cover all sorts of topics. A lot of them are mentioned here, from just understanding what it means to be a person who has received a medical diagnosis of a terminal nature, what those conversations include with medical care providers, and decision-making points for our own awareness. We don't provide medical advice ever, but it's really important that we're aware of what that realm entails for people, and then so that we can support them emotionally through that. We talk a lot about boundaries, a lot about role and scope, staying in our lane. And then we talk about turning towards suffering, the courage that takes, and some religious and cultural beliefs and practices from across the world, mostly contemporary, a little bit historical. Preparing for loss, we talked about vigil planning, and then we do have this bonus module that we open up near the end of the course where we talk about the private practice of being a doula and give people just a starting off point.
There are folks that have also said, oh, I'm starting in October. We're so excited to have our next session, our next 2 sessions are full already. And so that is incredible. You know, as I said, Francesca has a vision of a doula in every community. So we're working on that. The next 2 sessions in January and March are open. And so if this is something you're interested in, please do go check out our website and learn more. We always have people available on chat. And Charlie, one of our enrollment coaches, is in YouTube and he's answering questions too. So Charlie is always willing to answer questions about our programs as well. Francesca, this is a new component that we've added, the companion animal. And that's really been gaining in interest as well, which is amazing because, as we all know, our animals are 100% members of our family, and that loss is often not recognized in the grief that you have, and how important that is to recognize the family member that you may have lost. What is this program? And then I'll just have you quickly look at it, and I just want you to explain too, there's 2 components of it. One for folks that have graduated with our End-of-Life Doula certificate, and then somebody who has not. So we'll touch on that as well.
Okay, great. We cover, so I'll just talk about the 2 tracks at first because it'll help preface this. So the 4-week program is for people who haven't completed our 8-week doula program. And so they get a 2-week crash course in doula essentials and then 2-week specialization in pet loss and grief. And so our graduates get the 2-week specialization in pet loss and grief support. And we also have a veterinarian, someone local to here who's a guest facilitator who really adds so much to the program and to our boards for people, and people can ask her questions, which is wonderful. We've seen this wave of interest, including veterinarians, including vet techs, including people who provide care for pets. So whether they have a grooming business or a dog walking business, all sorts of interests and varying levels. And then also doulas who recognize the value and importance of pets for their clients. And so that can be not exactly about necessarily their pet dying and facing death, but if someone has a terminal illness and you're supporting them and they have pets, having a special sensitivity and awareness of difficult conversations and difficult decision-making points for that client as well. So it's been really interesting to see what brings people into the course. And some people are purely animal lovers and they want to be better prepared for their own pet's end of life, or for friends and family members, community members, to be able to be a source of support for them. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to really think about the differences between caring for humans and caring for animal beings, and the legalities alone, the difference is there. The there just aren't as many barriers for people in terms of options and accessing things as there are, and it's not quite so complicated as it is with human care. And like you said, the emotions involved, the unseen, unsupported grief that people carry. I hear these stories from some of our learners from their childhood when they talk about, we lost a pet died, and I didn't get the information. Nobody would be honest with me. Nobody would tell me what was really happening. They told me these stories, and it was confusing, and I ended up knowing it wasn't the truth about what happened and how difficult that can be for people to grapple with. So also caring for children
out there for people
and during their time of pet loss as well.
Anticipating, something might be happening with a human loved one or an animal loved one as well. I want to be respectful of the time. We're going to wrap up here, but I wanted to come back and maybe Lee, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. And this is such a great question from Julietta. What if you're afraid of dying yourself, yet have had an experience as a birth doula? How do you enter into this space if that's kind of your first initial reaction to this work?
Yeah, I would challenge anyone who's looking at any of this work to tell me honestly that they weren't afraid of death. I think that it's the motivator for a lot of us. And so I think if you've been working as a birth doula, you've been teetering on the edge anyway, because that's a gamble right there. I just think it's again, it's part of that self-introspection that you have to do. If you're going to be involved in either end of the spectrum, you're going to be dealing with your own feelings. And one of the ways that a really well put together doula training really helps you is that it forces you to ask those questions, and it forces you to be uncomfortable and address your own fear. Because honestly, in all of the work that I do an awful lot of advocacy and with all of these nonprofit organizations, and any pushback I ever find is always rooted in fear. So what that tells me is that fear's a great motivator. And instead of looking at it as sort of this bugaboo that we have about it, the same kind of thing that we have about pain in our society, we're so afraid of experiencing pain and being uncomfortable. I think that if you're recognizing that you're afraid, then you're already halfway there to being able to cope with this, come up with your strategies. And you're probably going to be a really successful doula. That's my perspective on it. I imagine Francesca has some other ideas.
I mean, basically, yes, welcome, you're human. And thank you for your honesty. And we all have those moments. I mean, some of us are able to get to a point where maybe we're a little more curious about what's going to happen during death and maybe potentially after death. We build up a little bit of curiosity. When you see deaths occurring, it helps to normalize it. And as Lee mentioned, it tends to not feel quite so scary because you have a frame of reference versus just your imagination.
Exactly. Back to Lee's point.
You have a place here. You're welcome.
It would be
and bring your fears, bring your hopes, bring all of your honesty. Yes. And I wanted to ask one quick thing, Nicole. I saw my friend Hoff is on. Hello, Hoff. And he was asking about
actually there are a lot of resources. So I've been putting some in the chat so that people can get to them, because I'm noticing some of those questions.
I assume the website?
For home funerals, you want to go to the National Home Funeral Alliance. It's homefuneralaLliance.org. We started that organization in 2010. And so it's got a great deal of information there for anyone who's looking all across the country. For End-of-Life Doulas, you want to look at the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance. This is an organization that we built, I'm trying to think now, 6 years or so ago. And this is directly in support of doulas. It's not explaining it to the public. It's just for you. And it includes scope of practice and ethical concerns and so on. But the home funeral piece, another thing you can look at is if you're here in New England, take a look at the New Hampshire Funeral Resources page. We also, I'm in the process of building state by state pages for people so they can understand because every state's different around what you can and can't do and how to go about doing it. So if you're from Oregon or Washington State, we have companion websites that delve into this. But you can always reach me at New Hampshire Funeral Resources, and I can direct you to the right place to learn about where you live and get, drill right down. So I hope that's helpful.
I suspect it was. Thank you so much. And one question we also have gotten a couple times, Francesca, is how do I continue this network after the program is done? Or if I am an end-of-life doula and I haven't gone through UVM's program but would like to connect with other doulas. And I'm just going to ask Kelly, who's also on our team, helping to put the Facebook page, the Facebook group. It is an open group, and so we can share that link if you are interested in joining. But Francesca, what happens in that group? Maybe just give people an overview of the connections that go on there.
It's amazing. I think we're close to 2,000 members or so, and it's really robust, wonderful conversations. People pose questions to the group. So sometimes they're seeking resources, or even if people have experienced something similar, if they have wisdom to share. So there are also, we always welcome people to put in relevant workshops or events that are happening locally or virtually.
Great. Thank you.
People share those.
Thank you, Lee.
So
it's
really wonderful. I feel like
Kelly,
it's a continued
Foster
learning
and Eric
opportunity
and Charlie
for me
helping
and for everyone
put on this information session and this wonderful discussion today. As we've mentioned, we've got lots more resources on our website, and Lee also put in several different links and some other resources for everybody. So we'd love to see a doula in every community, and we're hoping you can help us to get there. So thank you, everyone, for your help, your wonderful questions. We wish you the most wonderful afternoon. Take care.